like to thank I'd like to thank our co-sponsors, the Museum of Russian Art in Minneapolis, Global Minnesota, and the Committee on Foreign Relations. Because of a health emergency, Kathleen Collins cannot be with us today. She will be with us in a program this fall, and she is one of the outstanding academics in the country, and I'm hoping that the health emergency is resolved quickly. Now, we're talking today about Central Asia, a region growing in importance, where I've worked and absolutely love the culture that's there. We're honored to have with us as our moderator today, Dr. David Schultz, who's the leading American academic and happily a Minnesotan at Hamline and the University of Minnesota. And so, David, take it away.
Great. Thank you very much for everybody for attending today. And the title of our panel today, our talk is Societal Change in Central Asia. It's stretching from the Caspian Sea in the west to China and Mongolia in the east, and from Afghanistan and Iran in the south to Russia in the north. Central Asia is an incredibly large geographic entity, often ignored by Americans and perhaps even by most of the rest of the world. Perhaps I would even say that oftentimes maybe people couldn't even point to the region that we're referring to, even though, as I described, geographically, it's absolutely enormous. In ancient and medieval history times, Central Asia was the locus of continental excursions across the Silk Road. It was the site of Alexander the Great's farthest eastern conquest, as well as the crossroads for many other empires and battlegrounds. It was also, for some people, the land trek across by Marco Polo. But during the Soviet era, it consisted of several republics, which eventually achieved independence in 1991 with the breakup of the Soviet Union. During that time period, and I know our speakers will talk about it a little bit here, these countries, which I'll get to in a second here, were largely ignored, or this region seemed to be at most a footnote in Soviet history. But within this region, we have among these former Soviet republics, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. These compose the 5 former Soviet republics, and they, along with several other countries in there, which oftentimes are referred to as the Astans or Stans, are part of a larger area that we talk about in terms of Central Asia. Since 1991, some of these countries have achieved their own paths and gone in their different directions in terms of various directions in a post-Soviet era. Some have thrived, some have perhaps not thrived as much, some have moved towards democracy, some perhaps not so much so. But taken collectively, the countries that we're going to talk about today, the region we're going to talk about today, again, many of us don't know that much about in terms of their history, their culture, or their politics, yet they are an important emerging region in the world. This was really funny. Yesterday, I was checking on a date on something, and several years ago, I went to the American Museum of Natural History, which had an incredible exhibit in New York on the Silk Road in the region, thinking this was just 3 or 4 years ago. It was 11 years ago. I can't believe how time has flown. But the point being is that museum show sold out, expressing or indicating, I think, the interest, the lure that many people have in terms of wanting to know about this area. So what we're hoping to do for some of you today is to either introduce you, reintroduce you, or whatever it may be we're going to use here to let you know something about this region and offer a couple of perspectives in terms of it. Now, let me do some brief introductions here. We have 2 presenters today. I'll present in the order, or I'll introduce in the order they're going to present. First, we're going to have Olexsandr Kamarenko, who's a professor of history in the Department of Modern and Contemporary History of Foreign Countries and Faculty of History at Taras Shevchenko University in Kyiv, Ukraine. I happen to have the pleasure of having met Alex when I was teaching there. His list of accomplishments in terms of multiple books, 60+ articles, plus his Fulbrights. Again, it would take me an incredible long time in terms of going through them, but needless to say, Alex will be giving us a wonderful discussion of some of the history and background of the area. Our other speaker, who will come second, is Nargis Kassenova, who's a senior fellow and director of the program on Central Asia at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard, and also an associate professor in the Department of International Relations and Regional Studies, KIMEP University in Kazakhstan. Again, her credentials are just impressive also in terms of publications, work that she's done, editorship she's done. We will all be very well served by what both have to say. Now, what we're going to do today is have two presentations. Each person will present for about 12 to 14 minutes or so, which should leave us ample opportunity for questions and answers and some dialogue back and forth. You folks will note that there's a chat function here. Please put your questions in the chat feature. What I will do is to read those questions after their presentations, maybe ask a few of my own, but hopefully to stimulate some discussion and interest in this region, and maybe even encourage you at some point to visit or read more about this region of the world. So with that, let me turn it over to Alex, and please begin. Unmute yourself, Alex.
Yeah, I'm checking. Thank you very much, David, and thank you everybody for your interest in our topic. And really, prior to the breakup of the Soviet Union, Central Asia was one of the most consistently neglected and obscure regions in the world. But in the Soviet Union, and I hope my honorable colleague Nargis will agree with me, we have most popular definition of this region based on the well-known Soviet movie, The White Sun of Desert. The East is a delicate matter. Yeah. So yes, neglected, yes, obscure, but it's a very delicate matter. During the Soviet era, studies of the Central Asian republics were largely focused on demographic factors concerned with corruption and environment degradation, or the relationship of Islam and society. Surprisingly, but in the decades since the breakup of the Soviet Union, things didn't change. The global centers of power continued to look at the region in the primarily one-dimensional terms of economics. First of all, we are talking about oil and natural gas production. An entirely new conceptualization, it's better to say, of the region came after the horrible events of September 11th, 2001, and the war led by the US against Taliban regime in Afghanistan. And only after this, the attitude, the consideration of this region started to be changed. The generally accepted explanation of Central Asia holds that this political system remains authoritarian in a time of emergent democracy, with few traditions of or allowances for political pluralism, as David told previously. To enter into a discussion of Central Asia, first of all, let me note that actually this state, yes, with exception of Kazakhstan, largely were and still are very close to public. They really are close, especially Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. Therefore, our database concerning any kind of studying of this area really was and still is comparatively modest. To enter into discussion again is to be as much as variance with Russia and the other Eurasian states as possible. The definition of the region and its parameters are based on certain assumptions of commonality. First, there are the facts of Russian political, economic, and cultural imperialism dating to the 18th and 19th centuries. Initially with the czars and followed by general secretaries of the CPSU, the authoritarian khanates and satrapies of the region were absorbed into a quasi-European system of development. Largely foreign political and economical institutions were simply grafted upon tribal and clan association and barter of substantial oriented economy. The colonial legacy was a classic example of a patron-client relationship in which local elites were reliant upon St. Petersburg and Moscow for their positions and authority. The second point of commonality is the role of Islam, arguably the single most significant cultural determinant affecting Central Asia. But let me say that strength of this movement varies from country to country, but it is possible to make some generalizations. First, the revival, I mean Islamic revival, didn't and still doesn't seek state power. Most people at newly crowded mosques and Islamic bookstores say they seek Islamic influence in government by electing so-called good Muslims rather than installing a theocracy like Tehran. But the power of Islam should not be, how to say better, underestimated. In all of the Central Asian countries, the Islamic fundamentalists, yes, they have grassroots organizations that could grow into a formidable political force if there is sufficient dissatisfaction with secure government policies or deeds. So, as far as I know, as far as I just took information from relevant studies, books, and so on, by the mid of 1990s, Islamic fundamentalism didn't seem to be a serious threat for this country in general. Finally, there is really the horrible nature of the population. At the end of the Soviet period, the Central Asian states had the fastest growing segments of the population and accounted for slightly around plus minus 17% of the USSR's total. So most of the land that now comprises the 5 successor countries of Soviet Central Asia became part of the Russian Empire during the 19th century. Previously, their history, in case we are speaking in a few words, was one of the little centralized rule, and their society was mostly tribal and nomadic. Central Asia gained political unity when the Russian Empire established a so-called Turkestan government general to administer the territory. Accordingly, the administration of the region had an almost purely military character throughout. So it's understandable the resistance also became military, especially during Russia's participation in World War I. That's why the world-known Basmachi movement, a decentralized movement which undertook a protracted uprising against Russian imperial and Soviet rule by the Muslim peoples of Central Asia, The movement roots lay in anti-conscription violence of 1916 and continued till the 1934 during the Soviet power. After the Russian Revolution of 1917, Turkestan Autonomous Soviet Socialist Republic, or simply Turkestan, within the Russian Soviet Republic, was established in Soviet Central Asia. After the foundation of the Soviet Union, it was split into Turkmen Soviet Republic and Uzbek Soviet Republic in 1924. The Tajik Soviet Republic, accordingly, was formed out of part of the Uzbekistan in 1929. And accordingly, in 1936, finally, Kyrgyz and Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republics were established. And after the collapse of the Soviet Union, yes, all of them just gained their independence. So the division of Turkestan into 5 separate republics took place since the mid of 1920s till 1936. And at the same time, the inhabitants of these republics had an official so-called nationality written in their internal passports. Thus, also, each republic was named for a local nationality. None was any kind of national homeland. For instance, the Kyrgyz, Uzbeks, and Tajiks all have border claims on one another, and it's possible to continue. First impressions, aside the Central Asian population, are strikingly diverse. Let me add that, for instance, Tajikistan has 10 languages. Uzbekistan has 7 languages, and this list to be continued. Also, it's important to note that with exception of the Tajiks, because Tajiks are Persian origin people, other Central Asian population are Turkic peoples. The 4 Turkic states and sometimes Azerbaijan have long been referred to as a Turkestan, due to their common ethnic heritage and occasional association with the vision of creating a broader pan-Turkic federation of people. By the way, early in the post-Soviet period, there was talk about reuniting the Central Asian countries to form a form of a political entity resembling the former Turkmenistan. But due to some important reasons, the new leaders were not eager to lose their power, etc., etc., etc. This idea failed. Also, it's necessary to add that, sorry, and it is important to remember that the collapse of the Soviet Union, how to say better, was primarily, maybe it's better to say, a European event. Yeah, it was Europe, yes. The meeting of Yeltsin, Kravchuk, Shushkevich, and really it was Europe, not the Central Asia. The Central Asians were far from enthusiastic about the idea of complete independence from the Soviet Union. In fact, as per the Western studies, it has been noted that they are examples of, how to say better, of a rare breed, people forced to become independent, as per, for instance, our well-known scholars such Olcott and others wrote in their books. What little enthusiasm there was for independence came from small groups, comparatively small groups of intellectuals who were not able to appear effectively to the common people. Thus, there has been a strong tendency for the members of the former CPSU elite to remain in power. Accordingly, for nationalists to demand more autonomy without cutting their economic ties with Russia. So then the Central Asian countries have economies that are closely integrated with the rest of the former USSR, as well as serious social and economic problems. For instance, cotton monoculture during the Soviet Union really resulted in ecological disaster of all Central Asian region. Two of the most critical problems that they all, to a greater or lesser extent, have to solve are a high population growth rate and disasters of environmental legacy. A close third is under-education and a lack of technical skills among their indigenous population. Why? Because in the past, this item was balanced by the presence of educated and skilled Slavs, I mean Russians, first of all, Ukrainians, Belarusians, etc. Many of them, however, have been leaving because of rising ethnic tensions. Basically, other ethnic groups are generally not in position to compete for cultural and political dominance in Central Asia. This does not mean that inter-ethnic relations are unimportant factors, and hope Nargis will tell more about this, especially in case of Kazakhstan, etc. But really, the problems, or it's better to say the challenge, was and still is. For instance, in Kazakhstan, before the breakup of the Soviet Union, more than 6,200,000 Russians just was a large part of the Kazakhstan's population. Right now, really, this percentage is largely has been already decreased. The status of Russian language provides a symbolic measurement of the shifts in political power. It simply has been stripped of its official status in all of the Central Asian countries.
Alex, you should think about a minute or so to tie it up.
So I have a few minutes, right then. Perfect.
About a minute or so.
Thank you very much, but let me be a light speaker, right? So thank you, and just some particular issues of each country. I am not speaking about Kazakhstan because Nargis will do it better, right? But anyway, first of all, Kazakhstan really is more stable, and it's really the classical example when the former leader of the Communist Party really became a well-known and long-term president. And really, Nursultan Nazarbayev, the president of Kazakhstan, just little less than during 30 years, really showed just the model example how to transform its country to new epoch and to new stage. On the contrary, actually, Kazakhstan, together with Kyrgyzstan, had the best perspectives in democracy building after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Why Kyrgyzstan? Because Kyrgyzstan was an exceptional country, was the only one Central Asian country which headed after the collapse of the Soviet Union, not by a former communist leader. Askar Akayev, really, till 205 was a president of Kyrgyzstan. But after the Tulip Revolution, he became an asylum in Moscow, and since 205 and up to the present, we are talking about the 5 Kyrgyz presidents and no stability. Also, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan are the members of quasi-second local Warsaw Pact, the United Council of so-called Tashkent Agreement, so the United Armed Forces and etc. And then Tajikistan, together with Turkmenistan and together with Uzbekistan, led by former communist leaders. And this is the tendency of the Central Asian republics. And I guess, my dear friend David, that my time is over, right?
Yes,
Thank you
correct.
very much, and hope I'll have a question. It will be my pleasure to try to answer them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Alexander. Professor Kassenova, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me open my slides. Can you see them? Yeah.
Yes, we're good. We're good.
Great. Well, I had a challenge to cover the 30 years of independence, but obviously Alexander had the much bigger challenge of covering a much longer period of time. I will not comment on what he said, although I have to say that I'm not in full agreement with some of the description. But anyhow, let's go ahead. Okay. So I teach a course, I have to say, I teach a course on Central Asian global politics, and it's actually not, it feels tight, you know, kind of teaching a whole semester on it, but here I'll need to kind of pack the kind of the key things, core points into 14, 15 minutes. I'll try. But anyhow, okay. So first I wanted to give a snapshot of the region, of the key features of the region that might be relevant for outsiders, for global politics, as Alexander already described, and also David did. It is a region composed of five states that prior to the collapse of the Soviet Union were these 5 Soviet Asian republics, and there are discussions whether it is a region or not a region, but I consider it a region. But I'd like to mention that during the Soviet times, it wasn't Central Asia. Yeah? The term was Kazakhstan and Middle Asia. But upon independence, these five republics decided to refer to themselves as the region of Central Asia. These are landlocked states. Uzbekistan is a double landlocked state. Kazakhstan is the biggest, obviously, and I see the question here, why Kazakhstan is so big. Well, it's history. That's how it happened, and that's where Kazakh tribes live. And actually, one thing I want to mention that yes, Kazakhs and Kyrgyz and Turkmens were nomads, but there were settled people also, and kind of there are some excellent books on the Kokand Khanate, on Bukhara Emirate, and kind of these Central Asian states. And it wasn't all barter. There were fairly sophisticated economies, and there was a lot of trade. And once again, there are some really amazingly interesting works coming out on all these trade patterns. And there were Indian merchant communities in Central Asia, and so on and so forth. So that was connected both to Russia, both to the West, and to the kind of South and East. Okay, so Kazakhstan is definitely very big, and it's the 9th largest country in the world that we like to mention. We mention it everywhere. We're very proud of it. And the smallest is Tajikistan. Kazakhstan is mostly steppe. Tajikistan is mostly mountain. So it's kind of, you do have various terrain. It's a fairly big region, but it's not a terribly kind of, it's not densely populated region. Some parts of the region are densely populated. Fergana Valley that Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan share. It is densely populated, but we have areas where there is nothing. If you fly over Kazakhstan, it's like, you know, it's darkness, darkness, darkness. Then you see kind of a little spot of light city. Then again, it's, you know, kind of, these are like islands in the ocean in a way. Okay. So you see that kind of Central Asia disappears, you know, next to its very densely populated neighbors, kind of this population giants, China, Pakistan, India, and so on. Here you can zoom in. The overall population is 70 plus million. Uzbekistan is the most populated, and Kazakhstan is in the second place. So Uzbekistan now is around 33, 34 million. Kazakhstan is approaching 19 million. And as already mentioned, the kind of most of the population are Muslims, Sunni Muslims. We have a pocket of Shia Muslims, the Ismaili community in Gorno Badakhshan, so basically in the Pamir Mountains of Tajikistan. We have substantial Orthodox Christian communities, obviously, because of the Slavs living in the region. There are some Jewish communities and some Catholics and so on, but smaller ones. There is substantial ethnic diversity that was already mentioned. Particularly Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan are ethnically diverse, and it's important to mention that we have kind of big Uzbek community living in southern Kyrgyzstan. There are Kyrgyz living in Tajikistan. There are Tajiks in Uzbekistan, and so on. So you have this kind of across the border, the big communities, across the border, and that's important. I'll explain why later. Okay, politics. Alexander mentioned already that they are kind of pretty much authoritarian. The political situation in the country, we have authoritarian regimes. There was some liberalization, democratization ushered with perestroika, but toward mid 90s, we do see this authoritarian consolidation across the region to a various degree, and accompanied by kind of this personality, the construction of personality cults. And here's my country. I'm from Kazakhstan, so that's on the left. You see the statue to our first president, Nursultan Nazarbayev, who resigned in 2019, and that's the current president, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. The interesting thing is that Nazarbayev resigned, but not fully. According to the constitution, he is the leader of the nation. He retains a lot of powers. He can address the parliament. He chairs the Security Council. And of course, he's the leader of the ruling party, and so on and so forth. And if you go to the page, the web page of the president, you will see two portraits. Yeah, you'll see the first president and the current president. So it's kind of a Duumvirat situation in the country. And we have, you probably heard that our capital, Astana, was renamed after Nazarbayev. It's the city of Nur-Sultan since 2019. And we have, streets named after Nazarbayev. We have a university, we have schools. There are Nazarbayev intellectual schools. So I think you're getting the picture. But I should say that Kazakhstan kind of is as Alexander mentioned, it's quite open. Since the very beginning, the leadership decided that we need to integrate as much as possible into the international community, into the global markets. So it is authoritarian, but it's sort of this open, benign authoritarian system. Uzbekistani leadership took a different path. They were much more careful with liberalization, with moving to the market. The approach was described as gradualist. and the state maintained a lot of control over the economy, and also in relations with neighbors, there were kind of tensions and complications. But this changed with the political transition when the first president of Uzbekistan, Islam Karimov, died in 2016. He was succeeded by Shavkat Mirziyoyev, and since then, kind of Uzbekistan has been following, I would argue, following in the steps of Kazakhstan, of kind of opening up. I don't think we see democratization, but definitely the country is becoming more open, and we see some good reforms. And the big plus for the region is that relations with neighbors improved considerably. Yeah, so now we see this kind of growth of the trade between the states. And Uzbekistan is so important for the region because it's so central. Yeah, it's in the middle of the region. It serves as this conduit for all kinds of flows. Okay, Turkmenistan, that's kind of our extreme case of authoritarianism and personality cult. On the left you see the statue, the golden statue to the first president, Yazov, who had the official name of Turkmenbashi, the head of Turkmens. Then in 2006 he died, and everybody was wondering what's going to happen because it was just so incredibly centralized, and so kind of it was all around Turkmenbashi. And then well, he was succeeded by Berdimuhamedov, and basically we see the same system, and maybe even more eccentricities than we saw under Turkmenbashi, if it's possible, But here he is, and the country is the most isolated, and well, they're officially neutral, so they're not members of any kind of collective security treaty organization or anything like that. So they're on their own, isolated, difficult visa regimes. So they're not part of these more open arrangements in the region. Okay, Tajikistan, that's where we keep having Rahmon, although it seems that he's preparing succession and he's grooming his son to be the next leader of the country. The exception in the region is Kyrgyzstan. Askar Akayev, yes, he started as a Democrat, but then we did see these authoritarian tendencies, and then in 2005, indeed, he was removed as a result of the first tulip revolution. Then 2010, we had the second tulip revolution, and that's when Kyrgyzstan changed the constitution from presidential to kind of parliamentary presidential. And now, well, the latest elections again led to this kind of this cycle, and the government was removed. And now we have Sadir Japarov, who made this amazing transition from being a prisoner, to the president of the country, and he's trying to change the constitution back to the presidential constitution. So it is sort of this kind of unstable. We have an unstable situation. Let's see how it goes. So to sum it up, it's not a functional democracy. Okay, and they used to have more freedoms, more rights and freedoms in Kyrgyzstan, but we do see kind of these freedoms being curtailed, which is very, very worrying. And also uncivil society. Kyrgyzstan has a vibrant civil society, but uncivil society is also on the rise. Okay. Now, the economy, just very quickly to show you this couple of charts. What's in terms of economy, it's not that we're producing some, kind of electronics equipment or anything like that. The main export items are natural resources and oil. Well, Kazakhstan is the biggest producer and exporter of oil. As you can see, it's number 13 globally. Gas, well, 3 republics produce gas. Turkmenistan, of course, has the kind of 10% of all global reserves, it seems. And here you can see them at number 11. But also Uzbekistan produces gas, Kazakhstan produces gas, although they try to kind of, they use it mostly domestically. Sell some to China. Okay, I don't know, this is probably less known that Kazakhstan is the leading producer of uranium, which I think is becoming increasingly important, you know, with all the climate change conversations that, that we're having globally. Okay, now the politics. Here's the kind of map. Sorry, it's not very, I thought it would be a better quality, but here's the map from the book by Zbigniew Brzezinski. It was published in 1997, and the book is called The Grand Chessboard, American Primacy and Geostrategic Imperatives. And there is a whole chapter in this book on titled Eurasian Balkans. And this area outlined is Eurasian Balkans. And basically, Brzezinski argued that this is the area where the conflict potential is very high. That's why it's Balkans, right? Because like in the European Balkans, the ethnic religious diversity is high, and there is this power vacuum that appeared due to the withdrawal of Russia, kind of, you know, from the region as a result of the collapse, and the power vacuum creates this power suction. So there are like other actors are moving in. And at the time, interestingly, he thought that Turkey and Iran are the main competitors, yeah, the kind of contestants for having influence in the region. So okay, what happened? Did it blow up? We know that it didn't blow up, right? It didn't turn into this kind of really Balkans, despite this ethnic religious diversity, despite these undefined borders, despite the weaknesses of the states, despite, you know, kind of all these factors that he enlisted. Although to some extent he was right, because Tajikistan did implode, and there was a civil war that broke out in 1992. But that was not an inter-ethnic conflict, that was an internal conflict, more inter-regional than anything else. And there was kind of this nomenclatura, Leninabad-Kulab nomenclature on one side, supported by the Russians, and on the other side, this kind of democratic Islamist alliance. So it was very, very interesting kind of composition of actors, and Russia was a kind of as part of the conflict on the one hand, yeah. So it sided with this Leninabadi-Kulabi group, but at the same time, toward kind of in the mid 90s, they decided to push for peace, and Russia was instrumental in pushing the sides to sign a peace agreement, okay, in 1997, along with Iran. Okay, so Russia obviously for us is a super important actor, the most important actor. Olexsandr talked about the kind of this history of colonization, and well, if the Khanates, the Central Asian Khanates, were integrated in the 19th century, the Kazakhs actually became part of the Russian Empire earlier, and initially asked for the protectorate. So it's, you know, kind of it's a long story. It's a long story of living together, and well, what can we say about Russia? In the early 90s, there was this period of withdrawal and confusion, and I'm borrowing this description from Lena Jonsen. But quickly toward already the mid 90s, under Yeltsin, there already kind of there was a turn, and decision was made to reassert, reassert Russia's position in the region, okay, in the near abroad, because they felt that the West is, using and abusing Russia's weakness, and kind of they are losing out, and they need to return. So here you see Yeltsin, and that's his first trip abroad as a president. And he went to Kyrgyzstan to visit Akayev. They had good relations with Akayev, and there were sort of these reformers. And that's something that is worth noting, is that Russian elites have strong linkages with Central Asian elites, although, and that was particularly true for the first 2 decades of independence. Now we're in the 3rd decade, and this started changing because our elites became more kind of internationalized and globalized. Kind of many of them studied in US, in other places. So before, kind of, it was only through Russia that you would go up. Now that's not the case. That's not the case anymore. With Putin, when Putin became president, this trend became even stronger, and Putin pushed for both security, kind of for more security, deepening security cooperation, and also economic integration. And here you see this, it's the meeting of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and that's sort of kind of a military alliance, although it's definitely not up to the level of NATO. So the Collective Security Treaty itself was signed in 1992, but Putin decided to draw on that and kind of form a security organization, which was created in 2002. And Kazakhstan, well, basically Central Asian states, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan are members. Uzbekistan is an on and off, participant in the organization. Turkmenistan is obviously up. In the economic sphere, Putin started pushing for this economic integration as well. And first, Eurasian, the Eurasian Economic Community was created in 2000. Then in 2010, we saw the creation of the customs union, which is a very kind of serious thing, because the external border, like the common external tariffs were adopted. And then 2012, single economic space, and then 2015, Eurasian Economic Union was created. Note the date 2015, that's, when already the Ukrainian conflict was in full swing, and that basically, very ironic that the treaty on the Eurasian Economic Union was signed when actually kind of the energy out of the process was sipped out. Yeah, but I'll be happy to talk about it if there are any questions. Okay. On Russia and being the kind of this locomotive of economic integration. So basically, in a nutshell, Russia does not have enough resources for being kind of a proper locomotive. Okay, so as we know, the economy of Russia is not in a good shape. I don't think the Russian elites know how kind of to change the situation. Yeah, if you listen to rhetoric, there is some correct rhetoric, but if you see the reality on the ground, you don't see particularly promising trends. They're too busy with the geopolitics rather than the kind of proper economic development and modernization. But at the same time, we shouldn't underestimate the role of Russian economy for Central Asians, and that's an important place for Central Asian labor migrants from Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. Yeah, so that's a considerable part of the GDP. There are Russian investments in the region. There is trade that is, yes, kind of, it's not a monopoly anymore, it's not dominant anymore, but it is a very important economic partner for Central Asia. So the pandemic, kind of introduced some changes. Okay, US is a remote power, but it's a superpower. And in the 90s, it was incredibly important for Central Asians to become independent and kind of to start building the base for sovereignty and so on. So basically, what I want to say, the US, although it's very far, and although Central Asia is definitely not a priority for the United States, it is a very important actor for the region. Here you see a picture of Clinton and Nazarbayev. It's February 1994, and that's when Nazarbayev, basically, when Kazakhstan signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty as a non-nuclear state and went to deposit their accession document, in Washington, D.C. So, as you probably know, Kazakhstan was among the 4 nuclear states, or nuclear republics, of the Soviet Union, along with Ukraine and Belarus and Russia, obviously, and it had the 4th largest nuclear arsenal in the world, at the time of the collapse. So for the US, it was of utmost importance to press these newly independent states into going non-nuclear. And there were these negotiations, very complex process of negotiations, but Kazakhstan went along and in return received all kinds of assistance from the United States.
If you could tie it up in about a minute so we could get to some questions too, would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. So the next stage, very important stage milestone is 2001, beginning of the military campaign in Afghanistan, and that's when the U.S. set up these military bases in the region, in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and the others gave overflight rights, and now there are discussions whether, with this final withdrawal in September, the Central Asia can play a role, but okay, we can get back to this. I'll skip Turkey and Iran, but basically it's important to say that Turkey wanted to create this bigger Turkey community and invested a lot of resources into it, but it didn't get exactly what it wanted because Central Asian states were not ready to have again, the second big brother. They just kind of got rid of the first big sister, and so Iran even less successful than Turkey, but China became a very important. The importance of China has been on the rise. If at the time of the collapse there was very little little relations, little trade, almost no trade between China and Central Asia. The border was fortified. There were disputes, territorial disputes. Fairly quickly throughout the 90s, as a result of negotiations, these territorial disputes were settled. And here you see a picture from the Shanghai Forum gathering, and that's basically 3 Central Asian republics bordering China and Russia. Jiang Zemin, you see Yeltsin, and basically that was so successful, this process, that they decided to create this regional security organization that is now Shanghai Cooperation Organization in 2001. The trade is on the rise, has been growing exponentially, investments, from China are coming, and kind of the latest, that would be my last slide, David, no worries. So the latest big development is the launch of the Silk Road Economic Belt that later became the Belt Road Initiative in 2013. And that was done in, back then, Astana, in the capital of Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev University. President Xi made this speech. And basically the idea is to build these transport and economic corridors, connecting East and West, okay? And Central Asia is definitely kind of this link between China, East Asia, and Europe by land, not by sea, but by land. Definitely, it's like a buckle of the belt. So there are some complications with these schemes, but yeah, I'll be happy to answer questions if there are any about that. Okay.
Great. Thank you very much for both of you. And we may go, if it's okay, we may go over just a little bit for some questions here. Hopefully both of you can stay. So I'm just going to start to read some of the questions. You both keep your mics open here. And I don't think any of them are particularly addressed to either of you. So both of you feel free to comment here. So I'm just going to read them here. I've read about considerable conflict existed between Kyrgyz and minority Uzbeks in 2010. What is the current situation between the majority and minority groups on Kyrgyzstan?
Can you repeat the first sentence?
Yeah, the person said, I've read considerable conflict existed between Kyrgyz and minority Uzbeks in 2010. What's the current situation between the minority and majority groups now?
Oh, yeah, it's complicated. And maybe you heard about the recent clashes on the Kyrgyz-Tajik border. So this time, these were not Uzbeks, but Tajiks, and it was kind of, yeah, not inside the country, but on the border. But yes, there are tensions, and it's particularly problematic because first, the nationalism is on the rise in the region, and second, the kind of the government in Kyrgyzstan is not kind of thinking through consequences, you know. It's not taking into account the consequences, because this border, the latest border conflict, you know, it wasn't like destined to be. Definitely, it was, yeah. So yes, it is complicated, but we'll see. Uzbekistan now is taking a very constructive position. But even before that, when during this 2010 conflict, Uzbekistan opened the border for refugees. Yeah, it didn't get involved in the conflict, although it could have. And then they sent them back.
Okay, good. Alex, do you have anything you want to add?
Actually, the answer of Nargis was correct and complete, and lack of time, guess probably we need to pay some attention to another questions.
Okay, so the next question: does or will the U.S. withdraw from Afghanistan have any impact on the Central Asian countries?
2014, or the current one?
I doesn't say. I'm assuming he's referring to, you know, Biden's plan to pull out the troops, you know, by what, the end of June or July. I'm assuming.
Well, actually, 2014, I remember there was so many conferences. Okay, what will be the impact of the withdrawal when it was announced, and you know, we're preparing for this 2014. Multiple conferences, a lot of discussions, but then in the end things were okay. Yeah. Now again, there are discussions, not to the same intensity as we had in 2013, you know, but nevertheless, there are some discussions and there are some consultations. But I guess the kind of I think the Tajiks feel more prepared than they used to be. They've invested. They have invested into their military capability. The others are helping them. Now the Chinese got involved. You know, that China has a little border post on the Tajik-Afghan border. So there is this assistance going to Tajikistan. Uzbekistan has always been in a decent shape. So I think they are not really kind of worried. If anything, Uzbekistan is pushing for more ties with Afghanistan, and they're developing these transit corridors, trade via Afghanistan. They launched all these initiatives, new initiatives. Turkmenistan is a mysterious one. You know, it's not clear what kind of, and there are some activities on the Afghan-Turkmen border that, you know, kind of, and there are some clashes and so on. But with Turkmenistan, like really, it's hard to know what their real perception of danger and risk is, and how they are, you know, planning to deal with it.
Okay. Alex?
Well, definitely the US troops withdrawal from Afghanistan will continue to have a serious impact here. First of all, as for me, the Russian influence, and particular the Russian military presence in Tajikistan, will continue and will be even more. Please don't forget about drug traffic, etc. That's why also it's possible to add the same about the position of Kyrgyzstan too. I agree with Nargis that the attitude of Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan really will be specific due to the fact that two of them declared their neutrality, and Uzbekistan even second time broke ties with this ODKB, or Tashkent Agreement. But anyway, such a factor again will play an important role in current policy in Central Asian region.
Okay. If I could do a follow-up here, someone asked, will there be a refugee issue after the US departure from Afghanistan? Either of you want to speculate?
Definitely yes, because you know it's the biggest problem. It's one of the biggest problem of Tajikistan, because the significant number of ethnic Tajiks lives in Afghanistan, and what will be their destiny, who knows? That's why definitely U.S. troops withdrawal from Afghanistan will make the problem of refugees more acute anyway.
I'm not sure about that, though. I'm not sure, because
definitely I am not sure too, but I think so.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Obviously, I don't have a crystal ball either, but previously we didn't see these waves of refugees, you know, to Central Asia. The refugees were going to Iran and Pakistan, yeah, primarily.
Right.
So there you have like 1 million plus refugees in, you know, kind of not to Central Asia. And let's see what kind of agreements they can reach there. So to be honest, I don't expect it, but I might be wrong. I'm not an expert on Afghanistan.
Okay, I'm looking to see what else we have here.
Suggestion, no.
Yeah. We don't know.
I suppose, yeah. I don't know exactly.
Yeah, here's an interesting one also. Again, is there an exodus of Russians from Kazakhstan going on?
Exodus, how do you define exodus? The kind of the word, there was a wave, big wave, when the Soviet Union collapsed. Definitely, people were leaving, and
Something happened. Yes, with
there is still ice growing. Yeah, before they were the same size at the time of the collapse, like 38-something%. Now, you know, Kazakhs are predominant.
Okay. Yeah. By the way, Nargis, just repeat what you said there. You were frozen for a second here, so we missed part of it.
Oh, at the beginning on the Russians?
In the yeah, it's just as you were starting.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I don't know how kind of. I think exodus is a very dramatic term.
Okay.
They kind of they were never fleeing from Kazakhstan, right? Because the government has been quite careful, and like there has been a lot of attention to keep interethnic peace. So all forms of nationalism were suppressed, including Kazakh nationalism and Russian nationalism and all that. But yes, there is outmigration, and the ethnic composition of the country is changing. And if at the beginning of independence, Kazakhs and Russians were about the same group, you know, kind of the same proportion, now Kazakhs are kind of a dominant group. Definitely in the country, yeah.
Alex?
And just to add to Nargis' very professional answer, You know, first of all, we should add about any kind of political leverage. For instance, some months ago, the deputy of Russia State Duma, and by the way, the grandson of Vyacheslav Molotov, the closest Joseph Stalin's lieutenant, Vyacheslav Nikonov, openly told that Russia simply gifted the large number of territories to Kazakhstan. No, surely Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov just told, no, it's not our position. But everybody knows the role of Vladimir Zhirinovsky, just to tell what it's impossible to tell to the officials of Russian establishment, right? That's why probably this is a leverage, because yes, Nargis is absolutely right. The structure of Kazakh's population just changed after the years of independence. And definitely Kazakhs right now, it's the absolute majority of population. But definitely, yes, the north and the south of Kazakhstan are rather different, especially taking into consideration the national percentage. And that's why, yes, this is a question. This is not a problem. This is not the biggest challenge. But yes, this is to be taken into consideration. No more and no less. It's my point, right?
All right. I think we're just about out of time here, but I think we've gone through all the questions, but I want to pose one that I think both of you started with at the beginning here, and it's sort of the premise of our talk today. Is I think Nargis might have raised this at one point and saying, can we talk about Central Asia actually as a region? And so maybe both of you can kind of close with some observations here. Are we really talking about these five states as being a region? Are they really five distinct states? I mean, how would you sort of want to describe, very briefly at the end here, how we should be thinking about these five former Soviet states today?
Whom do you want to start, David?
Doesn't matter to me. Whoever wants to venture first.
Well, Nargis or me?
Okay.
Well,
Alexander, go ahead.
Just
Since you're talking, go
a
ahead.
few words, yes. Actually, as I told, yes, we have 5 countries. 4 of them are Turkic countries, with exception of Tajikistan. And definitely, on my opinion, it's possible to speak about the Central Asia as a region. But on the other hand, I am not ready, I am not sure, and I have no reasons to speak about any kind of political and to say nothing about territorial unification. Yes, this is a region, but definitely their national sovereignty, they really will protect absolutely. That's why no unification, but yes, the region is a Central Asia, especially just Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan are Turkic nations. And taking into consideration the policy of incumbent Turkish president Recep Erdogan, just step by step to establish some kind, not a federation, but something like this among all of the Turkic people all over the world. The question is still in force. But yes, I think I have reasons to speak about the Central Asia as a region.
Very good. Okay.
Without any states unification and so on. It's my point.
Very good. Nargis?
Yeah. Well, these are obviously 5 distinct Central Asian states, and whether it's a region or part of a bigger region, you can discuss that. To me, it is a region, but of course, the feature of the region is that it's sort of at a crossroads, and it has it has strong connections with these bigger regions. Yeah, it's part of the Eurasia and even to some extent Europe. Kazakhstan had a program Path to Europe even, and geographically it has a part in Europe, right? It's part of the Middle East, it's part of kind of this, part of Asia, obviously. So that creates difficulties, but to me it is, because when I meet Central Asians, there is a sense of kind of shared history, culture, the food is the same, so we eat plov and manti and, like this lipyoshki naan and, so there is that. Also the family relations are similar, and there are substantial similarities, and we are one neighborhood after all, kind of we are living next to each other and we live through things together. So to me, it is a region, kind of at this level of feelings and affinities, it is a region. So yeah.
Good, very good. I'd like to thank both of you today, and thank you for the audience for attending. I want to turn it back over to Todd if he wants to say any kind of closing words before we exit out. But again, thank you very much, all of you, for your presentations. Todd?
And thanks, David. First of all, I thank again our co-sponsors, the Museum of Russian Art, Global Minnesota, and the Committee on Foreign Relations. Especially want to thank our panelists, Nargis, Alex, David. It was fantastic. It was interesting because there are so many different ways of approaching. I sometimes wonder whether the rest of the world defines an area to make it convenient for the rest of the world rather than how the people define themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You get a very distinct, if you ask a Kyrgyz why he's not a Tajik, a different answer than if you say you're all part of Central Asia, and so the people have a very distinct personality, and a culture, though Nargis is completely correct. There is a broad sharing of some things, and that there is a definite sense of nationality and difference, within the area, which is something that I think is extremely interesting about the region. I also want to thank Lucian for doing all the technical, Lucian O'Brien for doing all the technical aspects of this. We will plan for programs in the fall. We'll look forward. I'd like to thank everyone for sharing part of the afternoon with us. And so on behalf of the Russian American Business and Culture Council, have a good day. And I hope it's a good week for you. Take care. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thanks.
David.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Пока.
Alex, Nargis, great.
Thank
Спасибо
you.
большое. Спасибо. Пока.
Пока. David, thank you very much.
Of
Nargis,
course.
thank you.
Okay.
My
До свидания.
pleasure.
Пока.
До свидания.